The cardboard box I carried out of my father's house weighed almost nothing. 2 sweaters, a phone charger, the photograph from his nightstand, the one where he and I were standing in front of his old hardware store, both of us squinting into the sun. I was maybe 7 in that picture. He had his hand on my shoulder. Neither of us was smiling, but that was just how we were. We didn't need to perform happiness for a camera, we just had it. My brother held the front door open as I walked through it. He didn't offer to help with the box. "You know this was always going to happen," he said. "You had to have seen this coming." I didn't answer him. I kept walking toward my car, a 10-year-old sedan with a crack running the length of the rear bumper. I put the box in the back seat and stood there for a moment with my hand on the door, looking out at the yard. The grass needed cutting. My father had stopped being able to do it himself about 14 months ago, right around the time the tremors in his hands got bad enough that he couldn't hold the mower handle without help. I had been cutting it since then, every 2 weeks, sometimes every 10 days in the summer. My brother had been in Chicago. "I'm just saying," my brother continued from the porch, "that Dad was practical. He always said the house should stay in the family. And I have a family, a wife, kids. You have," he paused. "Well, you have what you have." What I had, according to the will that had been read 2 hours earlier in the office of my father's attorney, was the hardware store. The one that had been closed since 2019. The one on the edge of town, with the hand-painted sign that had been fading for years. The parking lot cracked down the middle by tree roots. The windows filmed with dust so thick you couldn't see through them from the street. My brother got the house. My brother got the savings account. My brother got the truck my father had kept in perfect condition for 30 years. The one he used to drive to church every Sunday. The one I had driven to his doctor's appointments twice a month for the past year and a half. I got the store. My brother had laughed when the attorney read it out loud. Not a cruel laugh, exactly. More like the kind of laugh that escapes when something is so absurd you don't know what else to do. He covered his mouth with his fist. His wife put her hand on his arm, and I sat in my chair across the table and kept my eyes on the document in front of me. At my father's signature at the bottom, the handwriting shaky but deliberate. "I mean," my brother had said, composing himself. "I mean, no offense, but what are you going to do with a closed hardware store?" I hadn't answered him then either. Now I got in my car. I didn't look back at the house. I drove the 4 blocks to the end of Clearwater Road and turned left, and then I sat in the parking lot of the old store and looked at the building through the windshield. It was worse than I remembered. The sign above the door, Miller Hardware, in the dark green letters my grandfather had chosen back in 1967, had lost the second R and the final E. It now read Millie Hardware. The metal awning over the entrance had bent at one corner and sagged toward the ground. There was a wasp nest the size of a dinner plate tucked up under the eave. A shopping cart from the grocery store 3 blocks away had somehow ended up against the side of the building and had been there long enough that a vine was growing through the basket. I got out of the car. My father had given me a key ring at Christmas 2 years ago, before he got sick, and I had thought nothing of it at the time. It was old, heavy, 3 keys on a ring, no label. He handed it to me over the Christmas dinner table and said, "Hold on to these." I had put them in a drawer and forgotten about them until the night he went into the hospital the first time. When I came home to his empty house and sat at his kitchen table and held them in my hand, trying to remember if he had ever said what they were for. One of them opened the front door of the store. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted. Dust and motor oil and something sweet underneath it, like old wood and dried paper. The front room was exactly as my father had left it when he closed shelves still up, some of them still holding merchandise. Cans of wood stain, boxes of nails, rolls of electrical tape that had probably gone brittle years ago, a display rack of key blanks that would never be cut. The floor was concrete, gray and cold under my shoes, and my footsteps echoed as I walked toward the counter. I stood behind it the way my father used to. He had spent 31 years behind this counter. He had known every customer by name. He had ordered things specially for people who needed them and sometimes forgot to charge them when he knew they were going through a hard time. My mother, before she passed, used to say that your father runs a terrible business and a wonderful store. She meant it as a compliment. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I wasn't looking for anything. Maybe I just needed somewhere to be that wasn't my brother's house, which had stopped feeling like home the moment the attorney finished reading. I went through the counter door and into the back room. Storage. Filing cabinets against the wall. A workbench running the length of the far side, its surface worn smooth from decades of use. Tools hanging on pegboard, some missing but most still there. My father had been organized in a way that bordered on meticulous. Everything had a place. Labels on shelves in his small, block-letter handwriting. And then I saw the door. It was in the corner, half hidden behind a steel shelving unit, painted the same gray as the wall. I had been in this back room dozens of times as a child, and I had never noticed it. Or maybe I had noticed it and assumed it was a utility closet or a panel room. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to walk through sideways. There was a padlock on it, a heavy one, newer than anything else in the room. The second key on my father's ring opened it. I had to use my phone flashlight because there was no overhead light, just a pull-chain fixture hanging in the center of the space that turned out to have a working bulb after all. A single, bare 60-watt that made everything look yellow and sharp-edged. It was not a large room, maybe 10 feet by 12, but what was in it stopped me in the doorway. Along the left wall, filing boxes, labeled, stacked to the ceiling. Along the right wall, a workbench with a lockbox bolted to it, a small safe bolted beside that, and on the surface papers, organized into neat stacks under glass paperweights. In the center of the room, a single wooden chair. And on the chair, placed there deliberately, clearly placed there for someone to find, a sealed envelope with my name on it. My first name only, written in my father's shaky but unmistakable hand. I sat down on that chair and I opened the envelope. There were 3 pages inside, handwritten, and I could tell from the way the letters changed between the first page and the last that he had written them over time. Maybe months, the handwriting progressively smaller and more careful as his hands got worse and the effort to control them greater. I won't share every word of what he wrote. Some of it is mine in a way that can't be explained. But the part I keep coming back to, the part I have read probably 40 times since that evening, said this: I have watched you your whole life, and I have not always said what I saw. That was my failure, not yours. You came home when I needed you. You did not ask what you would get for it. You never once made me feel like a burden, and I know I was one, and I know what that costs a person. The store is yours, but the store is not the gift. Look at the boxes. Look at the files. The gift is what I built in here and couldn't say out loud. I looked at the boxes. It took me 2 hours to go through the first row of them. By the time I finished, I was sitting on the concrete floor with papers spread around me in a half circle, and my hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. My father had been investing, quietly, carefully, over 15 years, through a financial advisor in the next town whose name I didn't recognize. He had been putting money into accounts held in a trust that named me as the sole beneficiary. Not the house savings, not the truck money. Separate money, money that had no connection to the estate that had gone to my brother, money that had been growing in accounts that never appeared in any document my brother or his attorney had ever seen. And the store itself, the run-down, hand-lettered, shopping cart against the wall hardware store that my brother had laughed about, was not worth what it looked like. The land it sat on was worth considerably more. There had been a commercial developer who had approached my father 3 separate times over the past 8 years wanting to buy the property. My father had declined each time. The most recent offer was in one of those filing boxes, dated 14 months ago, for an amount that made me set the paper down and press both palms flat against the floor and breathe. He had declined it, and he had written a note on the copy he kept, in his block letters. Not yet. Waiting for the right person to decide. The right person. I stayed in that room until almost midnight. At some point, I stopped looking at documents and just sat. The bare bulb hummed above me. Outside, I could hear, faintly, the sound of the town settling into nighttime, a dog somewhere, a car passing on the road, the distant sound of a train. My father had heard these same sounds from this room for 3 decades. He had built something in here, quietly, without telling anyone, and he had aimed it at me with the accuracy of someone who had been planning for a long time. What I kept turning over was not the money. It was the intention. My brother had not been written out of anything. He had received exactly what he was meant to receive, the things that mattered to him. The house he had always said he wanted to raise his kids in. The savings he had always kept track of. The truck. These were real things, valuable things. My father had not punished him. He had simply known his children. He had known which one needed the visible inheritance and which one could be trusted with the hidden one. My brother called me the next morning. "I've been thinking," he said, and his voice had a different texture than it had on the porch. "About what I said yesterday. About the store." A pause. I shouldn't have laughed. "No," I said, "you shouldn't have. Look, I'm sorry. I know you worked hard these past 2 years. I know it wasn't easy." I looked out the window of the store's back room. The morning light was coming in sideways through the high, narrow windows, hitting the dust motes and making them visible, making the whole room look like it was full of slow-moving particles. My father's filing boxes were still stacked along the wall. The envelope with my name on it was in my jacket pocket. "I know you're sorry," I said. He waited for more. I didn't give him more. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. "The store, I mean. Are you going to try to sell it?" "I haven't decided yet. Because if you want, I could probably connect you with some people who do commercial real estate. I know a few guys. It might be worth something. The land, at least. Even if I said I haven't decided yet. He was quiet. He was accustomed to a version of me that softened edges, that found a way to agree, or at least not push back. I had spent a long time being that version, because it was easier, because he was older and louder and more certain of himself, and it was easier. 2 years of watching my father try to button a shirt with hands that wouldn't cooperate had adjusted my understanding of what was worth the energy of easier. "Okay," my brother said. "Okay, well, let me know if you need anything." I said I would. I set the phone down. What I felt in that room was not triumph. I want to be clear about that. There was no satisfaction in the thought of my brother not knowing what was in those filing boxes. There was no warmth in imagining his face if he found out. What I felt was something quieter than any of that, something that had no obvious name and that I have been trying to describe to myself ever since. My father had seen me. Not the version I performed for people who expected something specific. Not the responsible one, not the dutiful one, not the one who stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He had seen the actual thing, whatever the actual thing was, and he had decided it was worth planning for. Worth 15 years of quiet investment. Worth a sealed envelope on a wooden chair in a locked room. I thought about all the times I had wondered whether any of it registered with him. The nights I drove home from his house at 11 o'clock, tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. The mornings I rearranged my schedule to get him to his appointments. The afternoon I sat in the parking lot of the clinic and cried in my car for 10 minutes because the doctor had told us what the next year was going to look like, and I had kept my face neutral in the office and waited until I was alone to fall apart. I had never thought anyone else knew about that afternoon. I had not told anyone. There was a note in one of the filing boxes, paper-clipped to a folder of financial statements, that read, "You are stronger than you know, and I have not told you that enough. I am telling you now." He must have known I would be in this room alone when I found it. He must have pictured it. His daughter, sitting on the floor, reading what he could not say out loud. I pressed my forehead to my knees and I stayed that way for a while. The third key on the ring opened the lockbox on the workbench. Inside was a smaller envelope, and inside that was a folded note and a USB drive. The note had 3 words, "For when you're ready." I have not opened the files on the drive yet. I am almost ready. There are things I have done since that day that I would not have been able to explain to the version of myself who carried that cardboard box out of my father's house. I hired an attorney, not my brother's attorney, my own, and I spent several weeks going through the trust documents and understanding exactly what my father had built. I met with the financial advisor my father had used, a quiet woman named, well, I'll just call her my advisor, and I began to understand the shape of what was now mine. I did not sell the store. I am not sure I could explain that decision to someone who had not stood in that back room in the yellow light of a bare bulb and read a handwritten letter on a wooden chair. The store is run down. Restoring it will cost money and time and effort. The developer is still interested in the land. There are days when the practical argument for selling it is so clear that I can't find a flaw in it. But my father built something here. Not just financially. He built a place where people could come and get what they needed, where he knew their names and their projects and their budgets, where he sometimes forgot to charge people who were having hard years. He closed it because he got sick and there was no one to hand it to yet. He didn't sell it because he was waiting. I am going to reopen it. I don't know exactly what form that takes yet. I have been talking to people in town, to the woman who runs the diner 2 streets over, To the couple who have been trying to get a small contractor business going and can't find reliable materials suppliers nearby. To the older man on Clearwater Road who told me, unprompted, that closing your father's store was the saddest thing he had watched happen to this block in 30 years. There are people here who need what my father used to provide. That market did not disappear when the sign lost its letters. My brother came to see me about 6 weeks after the will was read. He showed up at the store on a Saturday morning when I was inside measuring square footage, and he knocked on the glass door and stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking awkward in the way that certain men look when they are not certain about something. I let him in. He walked around the front room slowly, not saying anything. He looked at the shelves, at the merchandise still sitting where my father had left it, at the counter where our father had spent 3 decades knowing people by name. He picked up a can of wood stain and turned it over in his hands and set it down. I used to sit on that counter when I was little, he said. He'd let me eat my lunch up there. Mom hated it. I remember. He nodded. He kept his hands in his pockets. I didn't know what it meant to him, he said. The store. I just always thought of it as, I don't know, a thing that took up his time. Something he hadn't gotten around to dealing with. I know. I was wrong about that. There was no apology elaborate enough to cover what had happened in the attorney's office. I think he knew that. I think he had come here without a script because he knew a script would sound hollow. He was standing in the middle of his father's store trying to find language that fit, and language was not his strongest tool. I could help, he said. If you want it. With the renovation, or whatever you decide to do. I know people in construction. I could make some calls. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just... He stopped, started again. He was my father too. I looked at him for a long moment. My older brother, who had not come home for Christmas 2 of the last 3 years, who had sent money when my father first got diagnosed and called it taking care of things, who had been in Chicago while I was here cutting the grass and driving to doctor's appointments and sitting in parking lots crying in my car. He had also been the one who taught me to ride a bike, who called me every day for a week after my first heartbreak without me asking him to, who, at our mother's funeral, stood next to me with his arm around my shoulder for the entire service and didn't say a single word, which was exactly what I needed. People are not just the worst things they have done. I know this. My father knew it too. It is there in the letter he left me, not in what he wrote about me, but in the fact that he left my brother things that mattered to him, things chosen with care, things that said, I know you too, I knew what you needed. I did not forget you. Make the calls, I said. Something shifted in my brother's face. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than relief. He nodded, once, and looked back at the shelves, and I could see him doing what I had done in this room, setting something down, deciding to move forward from a fixed point instead of carrying the weight of it everywhere. We stood there together in the quiet store for a while. Dust on the shelves, fading light through the filmed-over windows, the wasp nest outside, unmoved, the shopping cart against the wall with the vine growing through it. My father used to say that a building isn't anything by itself. It's just material. What makes it worth something is what people do inside it, over time, year after year. What gets made there and what gets said there and what gets understood there that couldn't have been understood anywhere else. I have been thinking about that a lot lately. I have been thinking about what it means to be left something that looks, on the surface, like the lesser thing. To watch someone else drive away in the good truck while you stand in the parking lot of a building with broken letters on the sign. I won't pretend there was no bitterness in those first few hours. There was. I am being honest when I say that I sat in my car in that parking lot and felt something hot and tight in my chest that I did not want to name. But I keep coming back to the note on the copy of the developer's rejected offer. Not yet. Waiting for the right person to decide. He had been offered real money for this land, multiple times, over 8 years. He had said no each time. He had said no because he was waiting to find out which of his children would see what he saw, which one had the patience to look past the faded sign and the cracked parking lot and the wasp nest and the vine-covered cart and understand that something worth keeping was inside. He left the store to me because he knew I would come here. He knew I would use the keys he gave me at Christmas and open the door and go through the back room and find the locked door and open that too. He knew that I would sit on that chair and read what he wrote and understand it. He did not leave it to me because I stayed when he was sick. He did not leave it to me as payment for what I had done. He left it to me because he had been watching his children their whole lives, and he had seen something in me that told him I could be trusted with something that required patience and work and a willingness to see value in something before anyone else could see it. That is not a small thing to be told about yourself, even silently, even after the person is gone. The files on the USB drive, I opened them last week. There were 2 folders. One contained financial records, additional documentation I needed for the trust. The other contained something I was not prepared for: photographs. Hundreds of them, organized by year, going back 40 years. My father had been digitizing old photographs, slowly, over a long period of time. There were pictures from before I was born, from my parents' early years, from my grandparents' time with the store. And then, starting in the year I was born, photographs of me. Every year, some I remembered being taken. Many I didn't. A photograph of me at maybe 4 years old, sitting behind the counter of the store with my chin in my hands, watching my father help a customer. My expression one of total concentration. A photograph of me at 12 helping him restock shelves, completely absorbed in getting something onto the top shelf, 1 foot on the bottom rung of a step stool. Photographs from my school years, from my mother's illness, from my 20s. And then, toward the end of the folder, photographs he must have taken without my knowing, me in his kitchen making dinner, me in his yard sitting in the afternoon sun, me asleep on his couch on a Sunday after a long week. A man who was not sentimental had quietly and methodically documented his daughter's life, organized the photographs by year, and stored them on a drive in a locked room for her to find. I have not stopped thinking about what it means to be known by someone who doesn't say it out loud. My father was not a man who expressed things easily. He did not say "I love you" reflexively, the way some people do. When he said it, it was because he meant it specifically, in that moment, for a reason that he could have explained if you had asked him. He showed his understanding of people in other ways, in the things he built, in the things he saved, in the things he planned for without telling anyone. I come to the store most mornings now. I unlock the front door with the key from his ring, the same key I used the first time, and I walk through the front room and go behind the counter and stand there for a minute before I start work. It sounds strange, I know, but I am getting used to it in a way that feels necessary. I am getting used to the idea that this place is mine, and that what I do with it is a kind of answer to something he asked without words. The contractor my brother connected me with started the renovation assessment last Tuesday. She walked through the building with a clipboard, and I followed her, and she told me what needed to come out and what could be saved and what would be expensive and what would be surprisingly simple. The bones of the building, she said, are solid. The bones are actually quite good. Someone built this to last. My grandfather built it in 1967. My father ran it for 31 years. It has been sitting empty for the better part of a decade, and the bones are still good. I know what it is to feel like the bones are good, even when everything visible looks like the lesser thing. I know what it is to come home carrying almost nothing in a cardboard box while someone else drives away in the truck. I know what it is to stand in a parking lot and not know yet what is waiting for you inside. There is a photograph on my father's old counter now, the one from his nightstand. The 2 of us squinting into the sun, his hand on my shoulder. I put it there the second day I came in. It seems right that it should be there. He spent 31 years behind that counter, and his photograph belongs behind it as much as anything does. I don't know what the store is going to become yet. I know what it was. I know what it meant to the people who came here. I know what it meant to my father. I know what it means to me now standing where he stood, with the keys he put in my hand, in a room that turns out to be full of things he saved for me. That is enough to start with. I walk in every morning, and I stand behind the counter, and I look at the photograph. I didn't need a mansion. I needed this.